that.
You were so young when you lost your mother. Do you have memories of her?
No, I don't, which is sad. I'm hoping they might come back one day.
Real Crime Profile is brought to you by many wonderful sponsors such as ZipRecruiter, Madison Reed Hair Color, Quip Toothbrush, and Man Crates. We are so thankful to have their support and so happy whenever they have a special offer just for our Real Crime Profile listeners. So please, when you hear one of these special opportunities to try a new fantastic service or product, do go over and check them out. We can't do our show without you, and we certainly cannot do it without the companies who make our show possible. You can find the most recent sponsor offer in our show notes, on our Facebook page, and on our website, realcrimeprofile.com. Thanks so much, and thanks for listening to Real Crime Profile.
Chris must have been really frustrated. He was a very single-mindedly determined man who, wanted to have it all. He wanted his girlfriend, with whom he was besotted. He wanted to have the money released from the house. He wanted to have access to his children. He just didn't want to have anything to do with his wife anymore. And so when Lynn said, I'm not selling, and she wanted to work things out, I think he realised he was at a roadblock. He couldn't achieve all of those ends unless Lynn was murdered.
Hello and welcome to Real Crime Profile. This is Jim Clemente, former New York City prosecutor, retired FBI profiler, and writer-producer on CBS's Criminal Minds. And with me today via Zoom is...
Laura Richards, criminal behavioural analyst from New Scotland Yard and founder of Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service.
And I am Lisa Zambetti, casting director for CBS's Criminal Minds. I have a real interest in real crime and the minds that solve those crimes and understanding when there has indeed been a crime, even when there is no body.
That's right. And we actually had, when I was in the behavioral analysis unit, a file that we kept updated constantly of no-body homicide prosecutions. So we looked at cases across the nation where prosecutors were successful in prosecuting people for murder when the body was never discovered, so that we could share that information with prosecutors. And I hope that the prosecutor in this case reaches out to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. If they don't know how to, they can get in touch with me through this podcast or online, and I can put them in touch with them. But they actually have a body of work that we've compiled on successful prosecutions of people for murder when the body is not discovered.
And we've had cases in the UK too. I think I talked about Sergit Atwell, and we've had numerous others that have been successful at trial. And what's also interesting is that Australia have had other cases where there's been no body and they've had successful convictions. And one of those cases I'd really like us to talk about is Kelly Lane. And probably not now to talk about it, but I think if we can circle back, because there's some interesting, I would call them double standards, that, if you have a DPP, a Director of Public Prosecution, saying if there's no body, no witnesses and no evidence, therefore it's unlikely that there should be a charge and a conviction, then you would expect that standard across all of their cases.
Right.
DPP is a very interesting person for us to think about here, Nicholas Cowdery, and just some of the decisions that have been made, particularly given that in this case there were two coroner's inquests and inquiries as well, one in 2001 and one in 2003, that both of them came to the conclusion that this was a murder case and that Lynn had been murdered by a known person. And they said that that known person was Chris Dawson.
Right. But in those cases, in those coroner's inquests, they actually took evidence and questioned people and evaluated their credibility, something that the DPP does not do before they decide to prosecute or not. And that seems so ridiculous, to have a body that does an inquest, a formal inquest, and gets testimony under oath and basically cross-examines witnesses, and the prosecutor doesn't even bother to show up. I mean, maybe they're not permitted to show up. I don't know, but they should want to show up. They should want to hear all that evidence. They should evaluate all those witnesses before they decide whether or not they have enough to prosecute a case. They certainly can't do that just on paper records. And that seems why this might have happened twice, where there are findings by the coroner's inquest that there was a murder that occurred and that they knew who did it. And still the prosecution said they couldn't prosecute.
The coroner will make recommendations, and they will make recommendations about whether there's perhaps a further police investigation required, or whether they will make a recommendation to the DPP to charge. I think it's quite similar actually to the grand jury process.
I was just thinking that. I was wondering if that was similar to the grand jury. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And we know of a case in particular where a grand jury came up with recommendations that weren't followed, and it's rare when that happens. So I think that's quite interesting for us to take this case apart in particular and just compare it with a couple of others at the same time, with the same DPP, Nicholas Cowdery, and just some of the things that he said about the decision not to charge. Because with Kelly Lane's case, there was a coroner's inquest, and the coroner actually recommended it to go back to the police for further investigation. However, the police took a decision not to charge, and there was no evidence, no conclusive evidence, and no physical evidence they determined to charge Kelly Lane with the murder of her 2-day-old baby Tegan. However, the DPP, Nicholas Cowdery at the time, reviewed the file. He took a decision to charge her, despite what the police recommended and the coroner's recommendation. So you have the opposite happening in
right.
Alleged that she'd come out of hospital and given the baby to the man who got her pregnant, and within 48 hours she was at a wedding, dressed in white, didn't tell anybody about having given birth. And it's quite a complex case and a very interesting case. She's currently still in prison, serving an 18-year prison sentence.
Okay, so this seems like there's some parallels between that and Casey Anthony and her behavior.
Yes, I think there's some very interesting parallels there in Kaylee Anthony. So I think it would be a very good one for us to, forensically deconstruct and compare it to this particular case and the decisions regarding the coroner's inquiries, the two of them, but also the DPP on the strength of the recommendations and the evidence that was put before them. And do you remember, Jim, that we talked about double jeopardy and whether, what the status was in Australia? Mm-hmm. We had quite a lot of our listeners message us on social media to say that, yes, double jeopardy does exist in Australia. And so they still have that test, but of course you have to have new evidence in order for that to apply. And then just two other things that people have commented. One, you asked the question about, sisters and nurses in Australia, and quite a lot of people, and thank you to our listeners for interacting with us, because that's why we do this, to say that, yes, it's quite antiquated now, it's quite old-fashioned, and it's the same in the UK, but they would refer to nurses as sisters.
Okay. Well, going back to the issue of double jeopardy, so then what that means is that the prosecution gets, quote, another bite at the apple if they try to convict somebody and they fail. If they come up with new evidence, they can, in fact, prosecute them again. Am I right?
That's right, yes.
So that means that there's even less of a reason why the prosecution should turn down prosecuting somebody who's suspected of committing murder, because if they don't have enough evidence now, they could get new evidence later and re-prosecute. So I think it makes it really interesting why the prosecution has twice gone against what the coroner's inquest has found and not prosecuted Chris for the murder of Lynn Dawson.
It's a very good point, and that's what we were debating. I think that's something that you offered up, that perhaps it was their concern that they wanted to get their ducks in a row, if you will. However, I think we can rule that out. And I think I mentioned when we first had double jeopardy come in, there was a case that the first successful case in the UK that happened, which was following the murder of a young woman called Cassandra McDermott. And I was actually in court for the successful conviction of the perpetrator the second time round. And the perpetrator was initially acquitted of her murder, Cassandra McDermott's murder. And he was a young man who was a footballer, so known for his footballing skills. And, lots of people gave him a character reference and so on and so forth. He gets acquitted. He then does the same to another young woman.
Oh, jeez.
She survives, but with very serious head trauma. Now, it made for a bit of a movie script in some ways, because this young woman couldn't remember. She was in a coma for some time and couldn't remember anything. She couldn't speak when she regained consciousness. But she spelt out, each day she would spell a letter out. Someone put a letter on the board, and eventually she spelt out his name.
Oh, my God.
Oh, good Lord.
And he was then arrested, and the DCI at the time was someone called Nick Scola, who did a very thorough investigation and put him before the Old Bailey, and he was convicted for both cases.
When you say put him before the Old Bailey, could you explain for our listeners that are not from London?
Right. So the Old Bailey it's sometimes referred to as CCC. It's our oldest criminal court in the UK, and it's really where all the big trials happen. So, anything that is of national interest, particularly if it's a London-related case, and many of our terrorism cases are heard there.
Is that like the Supreme Court?
It's not a Supreme Court because it hears, the cases that really have a high level of interest. And are the most serious. And it is quite it's a fantastic building with numerous courts in it. So it's a huge courthouse at St. Paul's, and it has a public gallery. It's quite old-fashioned still in some ways in terms of the processes and the procedures there. But it's really, when we've got shows like Rumpole of the Bailey, it's kind of what characterises what people think about in terms of our court system. And Cassandra McDermott's case, the second time round was there, and her mother is a wonderful woman called Jennifer McDermott, who I've worked with across many years, was there to get justice for her daughter. And I always wondered about how many other women he had brutalised and attacked, given that he was acquitted the first time round.
But he did get convicted the second time, and is he still in jail?
I believe he is, yes. I mean, as always, I tend to remember the victims' names and not the perpetrators. I can picture him, I just can't remember his name. But it was our first double jeopardy case, so our listeners can Google it and you'll find it. And Cassandra's mother, Jennifer, set up a domestic violence centre in Cassandra's name. But really, he stalked Cassandra. She finished the relationship with him. She was very young. He abused her, he coercively controlled her, and he stalked her, and he murdered her, and he got away with it, effectively, until the next time. And I'm just very pleased that Nick Scola was on the case, because he's a very thorough detective who I'd worked with on a number of other cases. And it was a very, very moving moment in court, being there at the Old Bailey, seeing him get what he deserved and getting justice for Cassandra. So that's double jeopardy. And Australia follows many of our processes and procedures, which is why the coroner's inquests as well are very similar to ours. The other point I just wanted to pick up on was from our last episode of when I spoke to Hedley. We talked about where it's alleged by Chris Dawson where he dropped her off at on the Saturday morning on the 9th of January. And I believe I said it was DY bus stop. Hedley and I have spoken subsequently, and I checked a couple of our listeners' messages who queried it and said, wasn't it Mona Vale? And in fact, that's correct. It was Mona Vale where she was allegedly dropped off at that's according to Chris's narrative. But even so, it being Mona Vale, it doesn't change the fact that, of the basis that it made no sense for him to drop her there on his way to the swimming baths. And it would have been far quicker a journey, and it was en route to take her to Chatswood. So it still doesn't make sense geographically.
It's interesting because the first one of these entries in the diary is over to Mona Vale to meet Chris and the two children. Joanne there too. Lynn shopping. Chris comforting Joanne on bed in study. So what is she referring to there?
Mona Vale is an area, and it's where Bayview, the house, was. So there's a bus stop there. So Chris alleges that he dropped her off there on Saturday the 9th of January 1982. So Helena, the mum, is basically referring to that it's the area of Bayview. And Helena's first diary entry and the diary entries are very important in this, was from October the 6th, 1981. So that's when we first understand, that Joanne was there and that Chris was comforting Joanne on the bed in the study. And she has an exclamation point there.
Right. But
so she obviously thinks there's something untoward about it, that they're sat on the bed. Why are they in a separate room? What's he comforting her about? And Lynn is absent.
so this would be sort of like a guest bedroom, the study, I suppose.
It could well be. It was a big house, Bayview.
Yeah, so it's not the master bedroom where he would put her 2 days after Lynn disappears.
One of the most important things we do for our health every day is brushing our teeth, yet most of us don't do it properly.
Well, Quip is a better electric toothbrush created by dentists and designers.
And Quip was designed to make brushing your teeth more simple, affordable, and even enjoyable.
I really love these sensitive sonic vibrations. It makes it much more fun, and I feel like I'm getting a much cleaner brush when I use Quip.
And it's also got the built-in 2-minute timer pulses every 30 seconds to remind you when to switch sides. So it helps guide a full and even clean. And, Lisa, up to 90% of people don't brush for a full 2 minutes or don't clean evenly.
Yes, I am guilty of that, and so are my children. And so that little timer is so much fun for them to keep them on track with their brushing, which is really important.
And I guess even more for youngsters, or if you're super busy, the tendency might be just to brush very quickly and think that you've done it. But actually, it's probably much more ineffective to do it that way.
Absolutely. So I just love Quip's design. It feels really great in my hand. I used to have this really bulky automatic toothbrush, and this is just so much more slim.
It's slim and it's sleek, and you only have to charge it once for 3 months, and you don't have all the cables and everything else. I just think it fits in the bathroom as well as looks good. It's very aesthetically pleasing.
Well, that's why we love Quip and why they're backed by over 20,000 dental professionals.
Quip starts at just $25, and if you go to getquip.com/realcrime right now, you get your first refill pack for free with a Quip electric toothbrush.
That's your first refill pack free at getquip.com/realcrime. So, Laura, I know that you make health and wellness a top priority in your life, and it's easy to do with the help of Care of's monthly subscription vitamin service, whether you're focused on glowing skin or boosting your energy levels, getting more sleep, or just generally being healthy.
Absolutely, Lisa. It's so important to me. And I've got to say, I really do love Care of, the vitamins that you take the quiz for. So it's online and it's super quick and easy. They ask you about your diet, health goals, and lifestyle choices. And it takes about 5 minutes to find out your personal scientifically backed vitamin and supplement recommendations. And I got to say, the ones that they match me with, well, my skin and hair, I can already feel the difference, having been taking it now for probably a couple of weeks.
You're glowing. I can barely look at you.
Thank you, Lisa. I think it's probably the rain outside and it being so warm in here, but probably the vitamins are making a big difference. And I had the immunity protector as well, because I can get run down from working long hours, and the vitamin D, vitamin C, and the immunity protector have definitely kept me feeling very energetic and, very healthy.
Well, it can be really hard to know what vitamins or supplements you can be taking. It's so overwhelming, but Care of makes it easy to find out what you specifically need to be your healthiest. And so for me specifically, I needed more mental energy, which will come as a surprise to nobody who listens to our podcast. So they recommended a whole bunch of Ayurvedic herbs that really has kept me feeling more on point than than ever before. Care of delivers daily vitamin and supplement packets customized to your recommendations to promote personal health and wellness.
And you know what? What's brilliant about it is it just gets them right to your door every month with personalized daily packs. So it's great for people like you and I when you have such a busy on-the-go lifestyle. And the other thing I really like about it is that, I don't know if yours comes with your name on it and then it gives a quote or a little tip.
Yep.
I really love reading those
Yep.
each day.
Yeah, that's really clever. And, a portion of every sale goes toward the Good Plus Foundation, which provides expectant mothers in need with valuable prenatal vitamins. Now, that is really, really important. And there are vegan and vegetarian supplement options available to match your dietary needs.
Take advantage of this month's special New Year offer. For 50% off your first month of personalized Care of vitamins, go to takecareof.com and enter Real Crime.
That's 50% off your first month of personalized Care of vitamins. Go to takecareof.com and enter promo code REALCRIME. I almost said vitamins too, but I guess I'll just say vitamins.
Aha. The British slowly getting across into the American lexicon.
Honestly, I don't know how she has survived at times. She's had her mother scratched out of her life, just blackened out. This 16-year-old babysitter thrown at her and said, hey, pretend that's your mother. She lost her childhood there and then. She lost her mum. She lost her mum's family.
Laura, can you tell us the context of what we're reading from? Can you just describe? So this is Helena's diary. Was it like a calendar that she jotted down little things in, or just tell us where this resource comes from?
So Helena had been keeping notes and little diary entries about what was going on. And there are 16 of these diary entries that Headley actually talks about in episode 3 of The Teacher's Pet. And this wasn't publicly known by anybody. Helena kept these diary entries, and before she died, she gave them to Pat, her daughter, Pat Jenkins, and she told her to destroy them. And thank goodness Pat didn't. And these diary entries were kept and then shown to Hedley Thomas. And so these now assume are very significant in terms of building the circumstantial evidence and the case against Chris Dawson.
Yeah, and can we talk about that for a second, the circumstantial evidence? Here in this case, it's so important because if Chris had simply said, Lynn disappeared and I have no idea where she went and she never contacted me, it would have created a investigation. People would then be looking into it. So in order to pull off his, whatever he did, he had to make up that Lynn kept contacting him and said she was going away. But also by doing so, if they do find Lynn dead, or if Lynn never shows up anywhere on the planet again, which is what happened, then it points guilt at Chris. It circumstantially proves that Chris lied to cover his actions, which resulted in Lynn's disappearance, as opposed to if Chris had simply said, I don't know what happened. If he had said, I don't know what happened, I'm going to need to get somebody in here to help take care of the kids so I could go searching for my missing wife, Lynn. If he had done that, then it wouldn't be strong circumstantial evidence. But instead, he says he's in contact with Lynn. She calls him repeatedly, and that she is seen by people and she's shopping. But if that is proven to be wrong, then he is clearly lying about it to cover for the fact that he made her disappear. And that's why this circumstantial evidence is so critical and is so damning towards Chris. Because in fact, in 37 years and how many days, no one on this planet has ever seen Lynn again. That's because she's dead.
Laura, did Headley say why Helena wanted these destroyed? I mean, why would she want them to not exist?
Well, maybe she didn't realize they would be significant at all. I mean, it's difficult to get inside somebody else's decision-making, their conscious state. And Helena was devastated. I mean, she was broken by everybody's accounts of not just losing Lynn. You have to remember she lost her granddaughters as well. Chris Dawson made sure that there was very little, if not any, contact between Helena and Chanel and Sharon. And that broke Helena's heart. She was absolutely devastated. So, I mean, these diary entries really do play a very significant part, I would imagine, in building the case against Chris Dawson. And also, just to Jim's point, I mean, wouldn't this also be very instructive in terms of the lies that Chris Dawson tells? You know, they could argue that the lies were evidence of consciousness. You know, each of these points, they
Right.
should be building that case, because, you know, he changes his account on numerous occasions, even down to when he's interviewed by the New South Wales police detectives. Now, bear in mind, these aren't his mates from Manly Police, you know, people that he played rugby with. When he was interviewed by the detectives, you know, he would talk about someone like Ian Kennedy, and who said that he thought, who was a respected and credible police officer. Chris Dawson said that there were murmurings that Lynn was in New Zealand. However, when the New South Wales detectives questioned him about that, and he had said what an upstanding, credible police officer Ian was, he then turns around and says, oh, well, he was probably intoxicated. He may well have had a few beers if he couldn't remember him saying that to me. And so the detectives, you know, in their minds, you know, 1 minute that he's using Ian Kennedy as a credible, he was the one saying that she was possibly in New Zealand, and next Chris is saying, well, he told me at a school reunion that, and, you know, maybe he was intoxicated. I think he was. He'd had a few beers. So he discredits him when he doesn't stand up with the version of events that Chris Dawson wanted him to. So when he was questioned and the New South Wales detectives came back at him, it strikes me that he has the ability to think on his feet, that he will use somebody if it suits him. Such and so said, but when it's challenged, and the New South Wales detective said, well, would it surprise you to know that we spoke with Ian Kennedy and he does not recall ever saying that to you? And in the next breath, he's discrediting the stand-up, you know, credible detective who he's paid credit to the moment before.
Right. And here's the thing. Unfortunately, these people are not as direct as we would be if he was being questioned by the FBI or the NYPD or the LAPD, because at that point, they wouldn't have just said he doesn't recall saying that, but he didn't say that because that was never an issue. That was never told to anybody because there was no credible evidence or even murmurings that she was in New Zealand. And had she been in New Zealand, she would have had to transfer from one country to another, and there would have been a record at immigration. But she didn't have any identification with her. She didn't have any way to transport herself to another country. And they should have pushed that issue a lot harder, but it seems like they were being very nice when they did that, quote, confrontation of Chris.
Right, maybe they were being nice, maybe they were holding things back. It's difficult to know whether there was a strategy. You would hope that there was, but I agree with you, Jim. You know, in terms of the questioning of him, when they did go and speak to him, the first question that they put to him was that, it was a statement actually, that they had come to interview him about the disappearance of Lynn Dawson, and then he launched into this whole diatribe about how somebody had been building a shed in the garden and had been talking to Lynn, and the man who was building the shed was religious and had said to Lynn, why don't you come and, you know, come to one of our religious retreats? And this was just right out the gate on the first statement of them saying why they were questioning him. So not relevant to what they were saying at the time, but in terms of the strategy that the New South Wales detectives had, it's difficult to know whether they, you know, were taking him in certain directions intentionally or not. And I would like to think that they had planned that interview and that they were clear about what they were seeking to achieve. But it's very clear to me that he does think on his feet. He has the ability to do that and use people when it suits him. Yeah. And Helena, within her diary entries, and I think they're very interesting to read, because she did, as we talked about in the last episode, she adored him and treated him very much as a son, and she totally trusted him, that the whole family trusted this man. So there must be something about him for people to feel, you know, that his account didn't need to be questioned. And every time I read the diary entries, and we'll go through them one by one, I still wonder why alarm bells weren't ringing earlier on. You know, when you think about the context of what was happening in that household and just how distressed Lynn was, I still find it difficult to comprehend why 2 and 2 got to 5.
one should ever feel unsafe at home. Period. Fear has no place in a place like home. That's been Simply Safe's mission from day one.
Yeah, Simply Safe blankets your whole home with protection, with around-the-clock professional monitoring. Make sure that police are on their way when you need them.
The security sensors are tiny, blending in with your home so you won't notice them.
You know, The Verge calls Simply Safe the best home security, and it's a Wirecutter top pick.
As more than 3 million Simply Safe customers already know, it feels good to fear less. You may have seen their commercial about it during the big game this year. If you didn't, you can find it online.
So protect your home today. You'll get free shipping on any system order. Just visit simplysafe.com/realcrime.
That's simplysafe.com/realcrime to protect your home and family today. simplysafe.com/realcrime.
Without a body, without knowing, first of all, whether in fact she is dead, without knowing, secondly, if she is dead, how she died, it's very hard to mount a case of a reasonable prospect of conviction just on motive and the undefined existence of means and opportunity.
They're so short, but they imply so much. So the one we just read, Chris comforting Joanne on the bed in study. Comforting her, what does that mean? Is he holding her? Is he comforting her for why? Why is she upset? There's just so much that I want to just say, what else? What are you talking about?
Can we go back a little bit to your question, Lisa, about why she might want to destroy these? Some people, if this was late in life, she said, destroy these when I'm gone, right? Helena said, destroy these when I pass away. And some people are really concerned about legacy when they're contemplating dying. And she may very well see this as a stain on the family name. And, you know, she really did hold Chris in very high regard up until, you know, a few months after Lynn went missing. And it's really, in my mind, an indication of how distressing this whole thing was for Helena. She wanted to pass on the information. She made sure that her daughter Pat had the information, but I think she didn't want an ongoing record of the stain on their reputation, with Chris bringing Joanne into the family and then Lynn going missing. And you can see she's upset with Lynn in a lot of these. And maybe she didn't want that to be a lasting memory. She's upset with Lynn only because Chris had told her things and made promises, quote, in the name of Lynn, that were not kept by Lynn. But those were just misdirections. It's Chris saying, Lynn is going to do this, or Lynn is off doing that. Lynn will call you. I told her to get in touch with you. And so Helena, she was hoping beyond hope that she could talk to her again, that she would hear from Lynn. And it never happened. So you see her over the course of these diary entries just sort of getting more and more distressed, and then finally sort of coming to the realization that Chris, something's not right about this. Chris should not be doing what he's doing, and what he's doing is an indication that Lynn will never come home.
Well, my interpretation, I mean, I agree that, you know, people think about legacy and their time on earth, but it could also be a sense of hopelessness, you know, that nothing would ever change in terms of her understanding what happened to Lynn, or in, you know, at any point. And therefore it's a hopeless state of affairs, because clearly in here, you know, the October 7th entry where she says, Joanne to school with Chris. Joanne has problems and is Chris's shadow. I mean, that statement on its own, you know, Joanne has problems and is Chris's shadow. You know, again, we're looking at Joanne, or she's looking at Joanne as being the problem, not really Chris. And then she says, Lynn home, very unhappy and almost in tears about Chris. So, you know, Lynn is clearly distressed when she's writing these things. And we know that she's not talking to Helena about what's going on. We know she's not saying what the real reasons are, but it seems that things are just not being joined up, you know, in any sense. And maybe it's also the guilt about the fact that these things, that when you read these entries, it's so clear, you know, in hindsight, but maybe it's that hopelessness and that frustration that it will never change anyway. And therefore, you know, what's the use of keeping these documents? They don't serve anybody.
Right. When she says, Lynn home, very unhappy and almost in tears about Chris, and it's pretty clear she's in tears about Chris being with Joanne all the time and comforting her on the bed in the study and having her in the home at all. Eventually, as we know, we hear that Lynn actually demands that she leave, that Chris not have her at the house anymore. Obviously, she eventually gets fed up with all of this and loses that sort of angelic view she has of Chris and realizes that he's taking advantage of her and that he's got a sexual relationship going on with Joanne.
In this entry, we start to see how much time he's spending with Joanne, that they're going back and forth to school together. And we're going to see in the next entry that there's just nowhere that he won't go with her, and is spending no time at home with his own family or with his wife. October 8th, Lynn not going to tennis, upset. Chris had to drive Joanne down to work, late night shopping, then pick her up. I hope I'm interpreting that right. Think it's an imposition and unfair on Chris and Lynn to be put in this situation. Lynn seems to feel it's okay. So this is just a day later when Helena had talked to Lynn and was almost in tears. But now the next day, suddenly Lynn seems to feel it's okay. What do you read in all that?
Coercive control. I think she is made to feel okay about it. I don't think she actually feels that way, especially as we know how things progressed here, how she basically forced Chris into counseling as a result of this. And I believe that she didn't actually feel okay, but she had to pretend that she was okay with it.
And we know she did put on a brave face for her mother and other people at times. So yes, it's contradictory. November the 1st, she writes, rang Lynn after tea. Lynn upset and depressed. Didn't sleep all night, upset over Lynn and Chris.
This is many weeks later, and it's still, whatever's happening is still going on.
Right. And Helena's saying that she's losing sleep over it, but obviously she's losing sleep because Lynn is so upset and so depressed. Again, we know from outside reports that at this point, Lynn is so upset about the fact that Joanne is there. Chris is not sleeping with Lynn anymore. They're basically roommates at this point, and she's very upset about it. Well, we all know why. We all have a really good idea why that's happening, because we know that during that time that Chris was finding every opportunity he could to get away from Lynn, to have sex with Joanne, even to the point of drugging her drinks, reportedly, so that Lynn would be asleep, so that Joanne and Chris could have sex in their home. On November 5th, 4 days later, Helena writes, Len and I went to see Chris in hospital. Lynn rang on phone, chatted for over an hour. Things upset in that household. Upsetting my sleep, worrying. Len said Joanne should go. Isn't this the infamous hospital visit in which Helena sees Joanne sort of leaning over Chris in the hospital bed and, lovingly dabbing his nose when Chris demanded that Lynn not go to that hospital? Isn't that this incident?
I believe it is, yes. Chris said he didn't want Lynn going and Joanne was the only one he wanted there. So yes, and it's interesting, Len is saying that Joanne should go, and Helena's using 2 exclamation points at the end of that sentence. Len said Joanne should go, and things upset in that household, 2 exclamation points.
So we should clarify for people who aren't reading this on the page. So Len, L-E-N, is Lynn's father. I remember when I was here listening to this on Headley's podcast, I was like, wait, Lynn? Who? Len? So just to make it clear, Len is the father.
So Chris's father and mother-in-law visit him in the hospital. apparently he didn't anticipate that. He just told Lynn to stay away. But he apparently didn't tell Helena and Len, his parents-in-law, that they should stay away from the hospital. So when they showed up at the hospital, because they cared about him, because they're good people, they find him basically in a very compromising position with Joanne, who should not have been in that position. She was a 16 or 17-year-old girl at the time. She was his student, and she should not have been in that kind of compromised position with him. Well, we have more diary entries of Helena to talk about, and what's really incredibly important here is how they dovetail with the circumstantial evidence that points at only one person causing Lynn to never come back home. So next time we'll continue with Helena's diary entries. Till next time, thank you for listening.
If you like our podcasts, there are a few things you can do. You can take 2 minutes and go to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review. You can also check out all Real Crime Profile offers and promotions and our sponsors in our show notes. Another thing you can do is go to Facebook and like our Facebook page, and you can also follow us on Twitter at Real Crime Profile without the E. And one last thing, please tell your friends, family and colleagues about us and spread the Real Crime Profile word. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate all of our listeners.
Real Crime Profile is produced and edited by Paul Francis Sullivan. Sound engineering by Mike Thal. Music is composed by Simba Tsumba. Logo art by Jim Clementi. Real Crime Profile is produced by XG Productions and distributed by Wondery.
For advice and support if you're experiencing stalking in the UK, you can contact Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service on 0203 866 4107, or you can go to the website where there's a lot of information and advice that you can follow on www.paladinservice.co.uk. If you're experiencing domestic abuse, you can call the National Domestic Violence Helpline for free on 0800 2000 247. In the US, if you're experiencing domestic abuse and need advice, shelter or counselling, you can call Genesis, the 24-hour hotline, on 214-946-4357. You can also go to their website for further advice or support, www.genesisshelter.org. And there's the domestic violence hotline on 800 799 7233.